Hello and welcome back to Tanya. So, off the note of the definition of idolatry is something that considers itself outside of the realm of God. That means, very simple, there's two options really. And the options are, or I acknowledge with my thought, with my speech, and with my actions that God is the only entity. God is one. And that way I'm being a vessel for him and a vehicle for him. And option two is saying with my thought, speech, or actions that no, I am something independent from God. I exist on top of God. That would be already blocking myself off from the life force that I'd get from God. And I'd only get it in a very peripheral way. I'd exile the spark of God inside of me. I'll exile it so that it's not revealed here, and I make a place that's void of God through doing that. So, with that note, Perek Chav Gimel, chapter 23. Ve'im kol hana'al yuvan v'yevuach heitiv b'tosefet biuch ma she'amachu b'zohar. With everything that we said, it will be explained well and understood well in much explanation what it says in the Zohar, that the Torah and God are one. And then in the Tikkunim, another Kabbalistic work, it is explained that the 248 positive mitzvot are the same 248 limbs of the king. Okay, so right with that background, we can understand two things. Okay, number one, that the Torah and God are one. That's the first thing that we can understand. And the second thing is what it says that God, so to speak, the king or God has 248 limbs. What does that mean? What are God's 248 limbs? They are the 248 positive commandments, positive mitzvot. Okay, so how do we understand that? Lefi shehamitzvot hen pnimiyut ratzon ha'elyon v'chefzo ha'amiti המלובש בכל העולמות העליונים ותחתונים להחיות. The way to explain this is that the mitzvot are the real desire of the real supernal desire. That means, so to speak, God's desire, and the true will that comes into all of the worlds, the upper and lower worlds, to give them life. Because all of their life force and flow of life depends on the action of the commandments performed by those on the lower realm, which refers to us. So there are two things, two kinds of will. One is an outer will, and one is an inner will. So an outer will would be something that is just a means to an end. That is, you only want it for something else. And the inner will is the thing that you really want. So let's say, for example, a father that has to provide for his family. He works, and that work pays off the bills and so on to support the family. So for him, his outer will is the work, is the money that he gets from the work. But that is only a means to an end for his inner will. His inner will is the supporting of his family. So the worlds that God created are God's outer will. They are only there as a means to an end. What is the inner will? The performance of the mitzvot by us, and by us in the lower realm. And not only that means, therefore, because of that, because all the worlds that are just created as a means to an end for the mitzvot that we perform, therefore, all of the worlds, higher and lower, depend on our performance of the mitzvot. And that's actually a famous saying from the Ethics of Our Fathers. It says, Da malamala mimach, know what is above you. And the Maggid of Mezrich interpreted that to mean, Da malamala mimcha, know that everything that is above, all the higher worlds, are from you, depend on you, depend on our performance of the mitzvot. Okay. ונמצא שמייסה המצוות וקיומן הוא לבוש הפנימי לפנימית רצון העליון שממייסה זה נמשך אורבך את רצון העליון להתלבש בעולמות. So it comes out, based on that the action of the commandments, so the mitzvot, and the fulfillment, is the garb, or the vessel, the inner vessel for the inner will of above, that from the action of these mitzvot comes the light and life force of the upper will to come into the worlds. Okay, fine. So again, they're there because of the mitzvot. Fine. Going further, so now therefore, the mitzvot are called the limbs of the king, the limbs of God, so to speak. דרך משל, כמו שאיברי גוף האדם הם לבוש לנפשו בטלים לגמרי אליה, מכל וכל. Just like, so the example would be from the limbs of the body of a man, that they are the garb or the expression for his soul, and they are completely nullified to the soul. כי מיד שאולה ברצונו של האדם נפשוט ידו רגלו הן נשמעות לחצונות תקף ומיד בלי שום ציווי ואמיך עליהן ובלי שום שיע כלל אלא כרגע ממש. Because as soon as one desires, the desire of man comes to extend his arm, his hand, or his leg, the body, those limbs, the hands or the legs, listen to his will immediately, without any command to those limbs, or any pause in the meantime. Rather, immediately, on the spot, literally, k'sha'ala bichtzona, when the desire came up. That shows us, what does that prove? That proves that the limbs of the body are completely subordinate and nullified to the soul. And the example is from a chariot, that the chariot is nullified to the driver, to the one riding it. Or let's say a modern day example, a car, right? The car is subordinate, is nullified to the driver. He turns the wheel, the car turns. He hits the gas, the car goes. He stops, the car stops, and so on. So too the body is subordinate to the soul. Okay. כך דרך משל, החיות של מעשה המצוות וקיומן הוא בת לגמרי לגבי רצון העליון המלובש בו. ונעשו לו ממש כגוף לנשמה. So too, this example can have us understand that the life force of the action of the mitzvot and their fulfillment is nullified completely to the higher will, the will of God, that comes into that mitzvah. And this mitzvah becomes, for the desire of God, literally like a body to a soul. And that means that the life of the mitzvah, okay, the life force that my hand went out and gave tzedakah and gave charity, doing that mitzvah, right? That is like the body of the will of God. That is completely subordinate to the will of God. It becomes a body for this, like a soul, which is the will of God. Fine. וכן הלבוש החיצון של נפש האלוהית שבאדם המקיים ועושה המצווה, שכוח בחינת המעשה שלה הוא מתלבש בחית של מעשה מצווה, ונעשה גם כן כגוף הנשמה לחצון העליון. ובאת ללב וגם חיים. Now, the same thing would apply not just to the action of a mitzvah itself, but even just the most external layer of the godly soul by a person that is fulfilling and doing the mitzvah, which is what? What's the most external layer of the godly soul? It is the action, yeah? It's action that comes into the life force of the action of the mitzvah. And it also is to the mitzvah like a body to it also becomes, not to the mitzvah, it also becomes like a body to the soul of the will of God and nullified to it completely. Now, that means that the action of the mitzvah as well as the layer of the godly soul by a person, which is the most outer layer, which is action, that is doing that mitzvah, that action is a vehicle for God. It is a chariot fulfilling God's will. Like a body to a soul. Okay. Continuing. ועל כן, גם איברי גוף האדם המקיימים המצווה. שכוח בחינת המעשה של הנפש האלוהית מלובש בהם בשעת מעשה, וכי במצווה הם נעשו מחיקה וממש לחיצוניים כגון היד למחלקת צדק עננים או שמצווה אחרת. So therefore, also the limbs of the body of a man that are fulfilling a mitzvah, which this power and layer of action of the godly soul that comes into it at the time of the action and the fulfillment of the mitzvah, they become a chariot literally to the supernal will of God, like the hand that gives tzedakah to poor people or doing another mitzvah. Okay, fine. I think that's clear. So another example, not just a hand that gives charity, but let's say another example, legs that are going to do a mitzvah. And also the mouth and the tongue, that are speaking words of Torah. And the brain that is thinking words of Torah. That is thinking words of Torah or words of fear of God, fear of heaven, and in the greatness of God, blessed be He. So what that means is something very powerful. That means that when we are fulfilling a mitzvah, whatever part of our body is fulfilling that specific mitzvah is a vehicle for the will of God. Okay. וזהו שאמרו חז"ל, האהבות הן המחקבה שכל אבריהם כולם היו קדושים ומובדלים מענייני עולם הזה ולנעשו מחקב רק לרצון הן נבדו כל ימיהם. And that is what the sages say, that the forefathers were a chariot. They are the chariot. The chariot. What's the chariot? What does that mean, that they are the chariot? That all of their limbs entirely, every single one of them, were separated and holy from things of this world. And their limbs completely were entirely a chariot only for the will of God alone, all of their lives. That's the level of the forefathers. All of their limbs were constantly a chariot for God always. All their lives. Okay. So now that is the greatness of fulfilling a mitzvah with the action. Now what about the more internal layers of the godly soul? The thought, so he starts off with now. The thought in words of Torah in the mind. and the power of speech of the words of Torah in the mouth, which those are the inner layers of the godly soul. Okay, there's the thought and the speech. And how much more so the godly soul itself that comes into them, into that thought, into that speech. They are all, the thought and the speech, any one of them, are completely, literally united in a complete unison with the will of God. And not just like a chariot. The difference would be that by action, when someone performs a mitzvah with their action, then that action is something that's not 100% one with the will of God. That action, that physical action, is something physical, and it is nullified like a chariot to God's will. By contrast, when it comes to the spiritual, the speech, which is a spiritual speech in a sense that is spiritual, and thought that is spiritual, it's not tangible, yeah? That becomes united with God's will entirely. It's not two separate things. There's the thought and God's will. No, the thought and God's will are one and the same. Because the will of God is the very halacha, law itself that he is thinking and speaking in. He's thinking and speaking about that thought of Torah, or that speech of Torah, that itself is the will of God. That thought itself is the will of God. Because all of the laws, all the halachot, the Jewish laws, are different forms of detailed ways that the will of God itself comes down. Right? Okay. Let's say there's a law to put on tefillin every day, for example. So that law itself is one of the detailed ways that God's will comes down into the world. Because that is how it came up to God's will, blessed be He. That this thing is permitted, or kosher, or this case would be an exempt case, or a meritorious case, a case where there's merit, or the opposite. That all came up in God's will. Whether a person has to put on tefillin one way or another, that came up in God's will. So that is a extension of God's will, that law. V'chen kol tzerufei otiot Tanach henamshachat chetzono v'chachmato miyuchadot bein sof baruch hu betachlit hayichud. And so too, all of the different letters in the Tanakh, with the written Torah, are extensions of the will and wisdom, God's will and God's wisdom, that are united in the Infinite One, blessed be He, with complete unity. Like we said in the beginning, that the Torah and God are one. Shehu hayudea v'hu hamadachulu, because as we've quoted in chapter 2, that God is the knower, God is the knowledge, and God is the thing that the knowledge speaks about. They are all united. So the Torah and God are united. So v'zeh shekatuv. So that's why, what does that explain to us? The fact that the Torah and God are one, that explains to us that when we're thinking the Torah, we're thinking God's will right there. And we actually have the whole God in that thought. Which is an amazing thought. And that's what it says, that the Torah and God are one. And not the limbs of, the Torah is not just the limbs of the king, like mitzvahs are. They're even greater than that. As we just explained, it is one with God. Okay. ומאחר שרצון העליון המיוחד בין סוף ברוך הוא בתכלית הייחוד הוא בגילוי גמור ולא בהסתך פנים כלו כלל בנפש אלוהית ולבושי הפנימיים שמחשבת בדיבור בתורה שאדם עוסק בדברי תורה. And now we're going to take it a step further. Since the will of God, which is united in God, the infinite one blessed be, with complete unison, is revealed completely and not just concealed at all in the godly soul, and the godly soul's layers, that the inner layers, which are its thought and its speech at that time, that the person is dealing with words of matters of Torah. So being that is expressed in the godly soul's thought and the godly soul's speech, what does that mean automatically? And so it comes out that also the soul and its garments, and these garments are also united with God at that time in complete unison. That means that not only is the will of God united with that thought and united with that speech, but God himself, or in the words over here, the infinite one, blessed be he, himself is united with that thought and with that speech. Like the unity of the speech and thought of God in his essence, as we mentioned earlier in chapter 21, when we discussed that God's speech is one with him and God's thought is one with him. So just like those are one with him, if you want to understand how that can be, that his speech and thought are one with him, you should check out chapter 21. So too, the godly soul is united and one with God at the time that it is thinking or speaking Torah. Because there's nothing separated. The only thing is, it's concealed. You can't see God in that thought. God is completely concealed in that thought. I mean, maybe not necessarily completely, but God is concealed in that thought. That being said, that thought is not separate from God. It's united with him. Now, taking it a step further even, this unity of the thought in God is greater and stronger than the unity of God, or the light of the infinite one, blessed be he, in the higher worlds. Being that the will of God is revealed literally, right? The Torah is the will of God, so it's revealed in the soul and its garments that are dealing in Torah. Because he is the Torah itself. The will of God is the Torah. But, by contrast, all of the higher worlds, where do they receive their life from? They only receive their life from the light and life force that only comes from the Torah. Which is the will and wisdom of God, as it says, that you made everything with chachma. So that means that all of the worlds are created through the Torah. The Torah is the source of all of the worlds, even the higher worlds. So that means if it's the source of the worlds, the Torah is higher than the worlds. Very simple logic. And it is the will of God, which in the language of Kabbalah, we've mentioned it in Tanya before, is called the light that encompasses the worlds. Okay, that's the Torah. This can't actually come into the worlds. It's too great for the worlds to handle. Instead, it just gives life and shines from above in a encompassing form. It doesn't actually come into the worlds, the Torah, and the wisdom of God and the will of God. Instead, it has to do it from above, because the world wouldn't be able to handle the Torah itself. So the Torah does it from outside the worlds, from above the worlds. And that very Torah comes into the soul and its garments in a revealed way, literally, when they are dealing with matters of Torah. So this Torah, which right now we are discussing, me and you, and we are thinking, it is greater than any of the worlds can handle, than any of the higher worlds can handle. It can't even come into them. They can't even handle this Torah. And we're just over here uniting with it, with our thought and our speech, which is an amazing thought. So now, even though we don't actually see the greatness of the Torah, we don't see that the Torah is united with God's will, and by extension, God himself. We don't see that. But at least, mazlahu chazi, that means our soul up above does see that. And actually, that's the very reason that we're able to withstand learning Torah. How can we withstand learning Torah if the higher worlds can't withstand it? Because we don't see it. We don't see the greatness of the Torah. By contrast, the higher worlds, they see the greatness of the Torah. So if they would have the Torah, they would cease to exist from its greatness. And therefore, we can understand with this that the study of Torah in our thoughts and in our speech unites us with the will of God, which is above all of the worlds. We can understand the greatness of the involvement in Torah more than all of the commandments, all of the rest of the commandments. That is the greatness of the Torah. And even from the commandment of, or even from prayer, which prayer, what does one accomplish when they pray? They accomplish the uniting of worlds above. When someone prays, they bring together different worlds above, and they cause the higher worlds to unite with various consequences. But when it comes to the study of Torah, it unites the person with the Torah, which is above the worlds. So prayer is acting within the higher worlds. Torah is even above that. That's the greatness of Torah. And for sure it's higher than the other mitzvot, the other commandments, because the other commandments bring down God's life force into this world. But when you learn Torah, they become united with God's will. So why indeed do we have to stop to pray? In fact, there are certain people like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his friends who did not pray. They didn't have to pray. That it was because they were so committed to their Torah study that it was their craft. They didn't waste a second of studying Torah. They would constantly study Torah. And indeed, therefore, because the Torah is higher than prayer, they wouldn't pray. However, People that are not on that level, that the Torah is their craft, like them, which is essentially everyone nowadays. I mean, maybe you have some special people out there. We need to stop to pray, because we would anyway stop our learning and do nothing anyway. So might as well take the time that we're stopping from our learning and use it for prayer. So now, here, what do we need to do now with this information? We need to take it practically. We need to practically use it as an inspiration, as a meditation, to think about this. Someone that's a maskil, that's a wise person, can take this and think about this meditation to bring upon him a great awe when he's learning Torah. Think about that. The Torah unites him with God's will. He says right here, what's the meditation that gives him this great awe? When he thinks, when he meditates upon the fact that his soul and its garments in his mind and in his mouth are united literally with complete unison in the will of God and the infinite light, the light of the infinite one. Blessed be he literally. That means that thought, that speech is united with God. Hamitkale bahem, that is revealed in that thought and in that speech. Mashakol ha'olamot elyonim betachtorim kalachashivi kamei v'kain v'efes mamash עד שאינו מתלבש בתוך הממש, אלא סובב כולם מבחינת מעקיף לאחיותם. That this will of God and this, the light of the infinite one, blessed be he, relative to that, all of the worlds, higher and lower, are completely unimportant, and it is as if they don't exist in front of him. And they are like null and nothing, literally. Next to God, all of the worlds are like nothing. And to the point that he doesn't even come into them. Rather, he just hovers over them. God, so to speak, hovers over the worlds in a hovering, encompassing way to give them life, the main life that they need. And this life force that they receive is only a very limited ray of life force that comes from God. And that little tiny ray of light comes into them, which is the measure that they could withstand, so that they shouldn't be ceasing to exist completely. So that is the meditation. Okay. To think about the fact that we are uniting with God and God's will, which none of the worlds can possibly withstand. All right. And this is the verse actually refers to this when it says, and God commanded all of these commandments to have awe of Havaya, of the name of God. So that is actually a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to have an awe of God. So that is the mitzvah, to have this kind of awe through this meditation. And on this, regarding this great awe, the sages say, of blessed memory say, if there is no chachma, if there is no wisdom, there is no yira, there is no awe. What is this chachma? What is this wisdom? That's referring to the Torah. So with the Torah, with the reality that comes with learning Torah and speaking Torah, which is the uniting, like we said before, the unison of that thought and speech and God's will and God Himself, or the light of the infinite one, blessed be He, like we said before. If not for that, then we wouldn't have awe, we wouldn't have fear. That's the saying of the sages. And the Torah is called, relative to the fear, to this awe, the gateway to the courtyard, like it says in another place. So the Torah is a gateway to this awe. Okay. However, we should make clear that not every mind can withstand an awe at this level. However, also those that are not able to withstand in their minds are not able to withstand this awe, not part of it and not a little bit of it, because of the lowness of the value of his soul in its source and origin, and the lower levels of the 10 levels of the lower world. So in other words, someone with a low soul is not able to withstand such an awe. This awe does not withhold him practically. That means that because he's just not able to withstand such an awe, then that's not indispensable for doing what he needs to do, for learning Torah and so on and so forth. It's not dependent on having a fear like this. If you can't have a fear like this, that's okay. Not everybody is built for it. Thank you for joining, and I hope you enjoyed.